Imagine waking up to find your bank account frozen, not because you broke the law, but because someone in Washington didn't like the industry you're in. This isn't a dystopian novel plot. It's exactly what happened to numerous Americans under a shadowy program known as Operation Choke Point. This initiative let regulators choke off certain legal businesses from banking access, effectively suffocating them without any law or any trial. It targeted gun dealers, payday lenders, and others deemed politically undesirable, undermining trust in our institutions and feeding a growing feeling and belief that the game is rigged. Today, we'll expose Operation Choke Point and its newer revival as Operation Choke Point 2.0, because who doesn't like a sequel to a great dystopian film? We'll see how government agencies pressured banks to close accounts of lawful businesses, learn about bureaucrats' plans that reveal a disturbingly hostile attitude, and examine how these overreaches have pushed America toward a low-trust society. By the end, you might question whether paranoia about federal power is as far-fetched as it sounds. Heads up, it's a long-form video, so we're going to tackle who invented the mess, how it spread, and some pretty fascinating details about how average Americans got hit. We'll go to constitutional problems with the nonsense and how this all contributes to a low-trust society. So stick around, because when we get into the details of who government bureaucrats targeted, I think you'll be surprised. The story begins in 2013. The U.S. Department of Justice, together with bank regulators like the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, and Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, quietly launched a coordinated effort to shut down disfavored businesses by cutting off their access to banks. This secret project was codenamed Operation Choke Point. As one official later put it, the goal was to choke them off from the very air they need to survive. In other words, if a payday lender or gun shop can't bank anywhere, it can't do business. It can't exist. No need to outlaw the business if you can strangle it in practice. Officially, the DOJ claimed this is about fighting fraud. Of course it did. If scammers can't access banks to move money, they can't rip people off, or so the reasoning went. But almost immediately, the operation expanded beyond chasing scammers. Internal memos framed online payday lending as the prime target, labeling it as a fraudulent scam in briefing documents. The DOJ wasn't just looking for criminals. It was targeting entire categories of legal businesses that officials in power simply disliked. Importantly, Operation Choke Point was never authorized by any new law or act of Congress. It was an executive branch initiative, improvised within agencies. It flew under the radar until whistleblowers and subpoena documents exposed what was happening. By mid-2014, congressional inquiries began as news spread that this program was pressuring banks to dump customers in certain industries without any indictment, without any due process. Who exactly was deemed so undesirable that they deserved financial blacklisting? The FDIC had compiled a list of high-risk industries that were to be scrutinized or avoided. At the top were payday loan companies, but the net was cast much wider. Legal gun and ammunition sellers found themselves labeled in the same risk category as pornography and drug traffickers. In fact, a 2014 report revealed the FDIC put online firearms retailers in the exact same bucket as porn stores and drug paraphernalia shops when warning banks about risky clients. For gun sellers, this felt like a backdoor assault on their Second Amendment rights, an attempt to put them out of business by cutting off financial services. Payday lending was explicitly in the crosshairs from day one. The DOJ's own status reports made clear that the intent was to go after all payday lenders, even lawful ones, casting the entire industry as corrupt. Internal emails later showed officials discussing settlement deals with banks that would force them to stop doing business with broad categories like payday loan providers, credit repair, and debt relief companies. No court, no hearing, just bureaucrats deciding that certain lines of commerce didn't deserve banking. Other targeted sectors read like a strange list of America's least favorite legal businesses. Adult entertainment was hit. By mid-2013, multiple porn stars had their bank accounts shut down with no warning. In one particularly absurd case, Chase Bank suddenly froze the personal accounts of several adult film actresses and told them it was due to potential fraud, essentially treating their legitimate earnings as suspect just because of their occupation. Coin dealers, tobacco retailers, online gambling stores, even diet supplement companies reportedly fell under the same blanket suspicion. If it was legal but frowned upon, it was a target. How did Operation Choke Point actually work? The agencies never outright banned banks from dealing with these industries. There was no paper trail of formal prohibitions. Instead, they used backdoor pressure and veiled threats. Regulators would advise banks that certain clients were high risk and could invite extra scrutiny. The FDIC, for instance, set out guidance listings that these high-risk sectors and warned of reputational risk if banks kept serving them. A former FDIC official later admitted the playbook. First, quietly tell banks to stop offering services to the disfavored sector. If any bank didn't comply, hit them with a deluge of inquiries and exam demands in short order. The cost of defying the hint was clear. Invitations to an endless, punishing audit. Faced with that, most banks promptly de-risked themselves by dropping the customers in question. As one bank lawyer observed at the time, this administration has very clearly told the banking industry which customers represent reputational risk. Financial institutions are reacting to this extraordinary enforcement arsenal by being ultra-conservative in who they do business with. To grasp the human impact, consider gun retailers during Operation Choke Point. T.R. Liberty, his owner of Top Gun Supply in Miami, opened his mail one morning in 2014 to find a letter from his longtime bank. His business account was being terminated. He had done nothing wrong. The bank openly admitted the move was due to the nature of his business. The owner, bewildered, soon learned he wasn't alone. In Nevada, Black Rifle Armory's accounts were suddenly frozen with no warning. In Arizona, American Spirit Arms, a firearms part manufacturer, was dropped by Bank of America despite a perfect record. Its owner, Joe Schirchelman, was livid. This seems to be happening with greater frequency. Now the smaller mom and pop shops are being choked out, and they need their cash to buy inventory. Freezing their assets will put them out of business, they warned. Note the chilling choice of words. Choked out. It was as if the very name Operation Choke Point became reality for these lawful gun dealers. They saw it plainly as an attempt to bypass the Second Amendment by strangling gun commerce behind closed doors. By 2017, under the new Trump administration, the DOJ publicly terminated Operation Choke Point, admitting it was a misguided initiative. Law-abiding businesses should not be targeted simply for operating in an industry that a particular administration might disfavor, wrote the Assistant Attorney General in a letter that disavowed the practice. It seemed like a clear victory for the rule of law and business rights, but if you think the story ended there, think again, because Operation Choke Point 2.0 was lurking in the wings. Let me pause and suggest it's time to like and subscribe. It really helps me build this channel, so I hope you'll do that. But let's jump into Operation Choke Point 2.0. We're going to fast forward to the 2020s. Cryptocurrency is booming, and with it, new fears in Washington. Scandals like the collapse of crypto exchange FTX in 2022 put regulators on high alert. By early 2023, crypto companies in the US started noticing a familiar squeeze. Banks abruptly closing their accounts or refusing to open new ones, and regulatory guidance casting a dark cloud over any bank that touched digital assets. It didn't take long for observers to warn of Operation Choke Point 2.0, an uncanny repeat of the old playbook, but this time it was aimed at choking off the crypto industry. Just as before, there was no official announcement of a coordinated crackdown, but the pattern was undeniable. In January 2023, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and OCC issued a joint statement discouraging banks from engaging with crypto, ominously citing safety and soundness risks. The same month, a crypto-focused bank application to the Fed was denied in record time, and two other banks, Signature and Silvergate, that were crypto-friendly, shut down or were forced out of crypto services. Behind closed doors, regulators were reportedly even more direct. Letters and verbal directives telling banks to just say no to crypto business. In fact, we now know that in 2022, the FDIC privately sent at least 23 separate letters to banks, instructing them to pause all crypto-related activities. One such letter read, "We respectfully ask that you pause all crypto asset-related activity," and said the bank would be notified when or if the government decided how banks could proceed. Imagine the effect of that. Your regulator respectfully asking you to stop an entire line of legitimate business and implicitly hinting that non-compliance isn't really an option. According to Coinbase's chief legal officer, these letters proved a concerted effort to deny regulated institutions the right to offer legal services to the crypto community, an effort that would disturb anyone, whether you're in the crypto business or not. Just like the original choke point, this wasn't one rogue regulator or one bank. The letters came from multiple FDIC regional offices across the country, all echoing the same directive. It was coordinated from up top. And if any bank didn't play ball, the next step, Insider says, was for examiners to swarm the bank with questions and audits on a tight deadline, a not-so-subtle punishment for defiance. By early 2023, the term Operation Choke Point 2.0 was trending in policy circles. A detailed expose by tech investor Nick Carter cataloged how what began as a trickle of isolated incidents had become a flood of coordinated action to cut crypto off from banking. Even some U.S. senators took notice. In January 2025, Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming revealed that FDIC whistleblowers had come to her, alleging that agency higher-ups were so deep into a crypto crackdown that they were even destroying internal documents and preventing staff from cooperating with lawful oversight. Lummis publicly warned the FDIC to preserve all records and cautioned that if these allegations proved true, she'd seek criminal referrals for obstruction. Think about that. A federal regulator allegedly shredding evidence of an operation to choke off a legitimate legal industry. It sounds like a conspiracy theorist rant, except this time a sitting U.S. senator is sounding the alarm. So how do we learn about these secret FDIC pause letters? Enter History Associates, a consulting firm hired by Coinbase that took the FDIC and SEC to court in the middle of 2024. Their mission: force these agencies to hand over records via the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. For months, the FDIC resisted, dragging its feet and even omitting entire categories of communications, like internal chat messages, from its FOIA responses. It took a lawsuit and a judge's order to finally pry loose the truth. When History Associates finally obtained 23 redacted FDIC letters, the truth of Choke Point 2.0 came into focus. Each letter was virtually identical, sent to banks in 2022, effectively telling them to freeze all crypto-related accounts and activities until further notice. The implication was clear. Any bank that ignored this request could face regulatory trouble. In public, the FDIC kept insisting, "We don't discourage banks from servicing any specific type of customer." But behind closed doors, they were doing exactly that. The FOIA battle and the whistleblower claims together paint a picture of agencies operating in darkness, aware that what they're doing wouldn't withstand public or legal scrutiny. Both Operation Choke Point 1.0 and 2.0 raise fundamental constitutional questions. In America, if the government wants to shut down a lawful business, there's supposed to be safeguards. Charges, evidence, a day in court, due process is guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment also protects property and profits held by people, as well as the Fourth and 14th Amendment. Let's not forget the First Amendment that protects rights of individuals and businesses to speak, advertise, associate freely. But with Choke Point, bureaucrats acted as judge, jury, executioner in the shadows. No payday lender or gun shop was formally charged with a crime before being cut off. No crypto firm was given a hearing before their banking dried up. This looks a lot like punishment without due process and without respect for key liberties, something the Constitution emphatically forbids. There are First Amendment issues, too, especially with Operation Choke Point's broad sweep. Consider this. Some of the targeted industries, guns, payday loans, crypto, have powerful political and ideological perspectives. 2 years ago, it might have been a Democratic administration debanking gun sellers or crypto companies it views skeptically. Tomorrow, it could be a Republican administration debanking, say, marijuana dispensaries, environmental groups, or even media outlets whose views it dislikes. When the government uses financial levers to silence or starve out a lawful organization, it skirts dangerously close to censorship. Regulators can force banks to stop processing legal transactions simply because they don't like a particular industry. To many, that sounds like a government end run around the Constitution, doing indirectly through bank pressure what it can't do directly in the law. These concerns have prompted responses. In Congress, bipartisan outrage over Operation Choke Point led to bills to ensure fair access to banking for lawful businesses. Bank regulators under the Trump administration even floated a fair access rule that would bar banks from blacklisting entire industries without individual risk assessments. That rule was shelved in 2021, and as we saw today, officials like Senator Loomis and others are gearing up for new investigations and possible legislation to prevent Choke Point 3.0 style abuse in the future. What happens when citizens lose faith that the system is fair? We risk becoming a low-trust society, and that has dire ripple effects. Operation Choke Point and its sequel have ironically fed the very beast the government now struggles with: conspiracy theories and skepticism of federal power. When people hear that bureaucrats secretly targeted gun shops or that bankers colluded to kill off crypto startups, it validates the worst suspicions about the deep state. Even if you personally dislike payday lenders or worry about crypto scams, seeing officials abuse their power in darkness makes it easy to believe other wild conspiracies about government overreach. Trust in federal institutions was already fragile. These operations acted like gasoline on that fire. Now gun owners, crypto enthusiasts, libertarians, and even many progressives find rare common ground in distrusting regulators. They ask, if they can do that to those guys, could they do it to me someday? Increasingly, the answer feels like a yes. This fear leads to a public trust that's hyper-vigilant, cynical, and ready to assume the worst of their government. In a low-trust society, every action by authorities gets scrutinized for hidden motives. People stop giving the benefit of the doubt. Financial regulations meant to protect consumers? Citizens wonder if they're actually a smokescreen for social engineering. Bank closures for safety? Observers speculate it's a political purge. This is no way to maintain a healthy republic. Perhaps worst of all, genuine transparency and accountability suffer because the trust barrier causes polarization. Instead of working together to combat real fraud or crime, officials and industries spend energy fighting or fearing one another. Legitimate efforts, like catching actual criminals, are undermined when agencies cry wolf by targeting lawful, legitimate actors. It becomes harder to distinguish real warnings from politically motivated ones. Operation Choke Point and its sequel stand as a cautionary tale of government overreach. In seeking to combat perceived ills, officials crossed lines that should never be crossed in a constitutional republic. Yes, fraud should be stopped. Yes, banks should be vigilant. But when unelected regulators assume the power to decide which legal businesses get to exist, all behind closed doors, we veer into dangerous territory. We erode the rule of law and we erode public trust. To move forward, sunlight's the best disinfectant. The new lawsuits and FOIA fights are a start, forcing transparency on those who prefer to operate in the shadows. Bipartisan voices in Congress are starting to demand answers and rein in these practices. Rebuilding trust will take time. It requires our institutions to humbly acknowledge mistakes like Operation Choke Point and commit to clear, lawful, fair rules going forward. As we conclude, remember this key point. Government that rules by secret pressure is a government that breeds suspicion. Operation Choke Point undermined trust in banks and regulators alike, planting the seeds of a low-trust society we all now are grappling with. If we want to restore faith in our system, we must ensure that choking off lawful businesses never happens again. Only then can we begin to douse the fires of conspiracy and rebuild a society where even those who disagree can trust that the rules of the game aren't secretly rigged against them. Thanks for joining me today. My goal is to give you the tools to decipher constitutional puzzles of the day in an interesting and educational way. Join me next week as we explore yet another constitutional controversy.